William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I welcome you to another Two Hats special of community events. Let's look in and see what's really happening.
And good afternoon and welcome to Lambda Weekly. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with a sweltering Lerone Landis and the late Patti Fink, who was smart to be a little bit late today because it's, 110 outside and it's 135 in here. Yeah, and tomorrow it's supposed to go up to, I think, a high temperature of 120, something like that. So it's just lovely this week.
Yeah.
Our guest today, and thank you for coming on a day like this, filmmaker Byron Hunter. His new film is Santos Vive.
Yes. Byron, thank you so much. When I first heard about this project a couple of months ago, I was so enthralled about it because it's a story I'd never heard of. I imagine a lot of probably young Dallas people have never heard of it. So, but you're bringing it back to life. It's part of Dallas history. Please tell us, what is it about?
Well, the idea of Santos Vive as a whole is really a much broader story, as we discussed earlier, than just the idea of what happened with the Santos Rodriguez case. However, since it is kind of a centrifuge for discussion here this week in Dallas, I will kind of let you know about the case, and then we can kind of talk later about the expansive of what the total movie's about, because I just don't want people to think it's just about one story. It's really a very broad-based story that I want people to come in and really want to see and learn, because, again, it's much deeper than Santos. However, the story centers around a young man by the name of Santos Rodriguez. He was a Mexican-American boy, born and raised in America, in Dallas. In 1973, there was a situation where a gas station, a Fina gas station, was burglarized at about 2:30 in the morning on the morning of July 24th of 1973, which July 24th, it will be here Tuesday. A police officer saw three boys running away from the scene. He felt that he had identified two of them as being the Rodriguez brothers, David and Santos Rodriguez. So he took, he called for backup, and one of his backup was a gentleman by the name of Daryl Kane, and he and these other police officers, his name was Roy Arnold, they went to the house of the grandfather who took care of Santos and David Rodriguez. Opened the door. The grandfather didn't speak English, but somehow it was reported that he had given them permission to take the boys from the house at 2:30 a.m., 2:40 a.m. The police went and grabbed the boys out of bed, dragged them, handcuffed, into a police car, and took them to the Fina gas station, which is on Cedar Springs and Bookout Street, which is now a Compass Bank sitting directly across the street from the Hotel Crescent Court. That area was formerly known as Little Mexico, so that'll tell you how far Uptown has come, because Little Mexico at that point was the main Mexican community in Dallas, and now it is the Hotel Crescent Court and the American Airlines Arena, etc. But that's another story, but that's all part of the film as well. But getting back to the case, they took them back to the Fina gas station, and at the gas station at 3 o'clock in the morning, they interrogated the boys because they wanted a confession from them for committing this burglary. They were still trying to wake up from their sleep, and they were like, dude, we didn't commit this particular crime. But one of the officers felt like he could coerce a confession out of them. So he took his gun and his .357 Magnum and took it out and opened the chamber and spun the chamber in front of the kids and locked it back in place and said, tell me, did you rob this station? And he said, I did not rob this gas station. When he did not, he put the gun to the boy's head. This was Santos Rodriguez, and he clicked the gun as if to play Russian roulette and do whatever. The gun did not go off. But obviously it frightened the boys deeply, considering, again, these boys are 12 and 13 years old. Wow. And Santos is with his brother, who is older than him, who obviously has a feeling for wanting to protect his brother. And he's handcuffed with his hands behind his back in a police car. So second time around, this officer asked for the young man to give him a confession for this burglary. And when he said no, he put the gun to his head again and blew his brains out. Literally killed him in the back of the police car. He was actually sitting in the front seat, but the officer was in the back seat. So he actually blew his brains out. He killed him, shot him right through the ear with the .357 Magnum, and he died instantly at the scene.
Oh my God!
Obviously,
what happened to that police officer?
That's a part of the movie too. You gotta come see the movie. No, but I'll tell you, I'm gonna get to that as well.
Okay.
So ultimately, obviously, this stunned the nation. And I think you have to also put this in context. This is 1973. This is approximately 10 years after the JFK assassination in Dallas, which it had taken 10 years for the city of Dallas to even get over the JFK assassination, because Dallas was a pariah city for about 5 or 6 years. Nobody did convention business here. Nobody did anything in the city of Dallas at that time. From 1963 to about 1968, nobody came here, okay? Nobody wanted to mess with Dallas. So now it's 1973, and you have this murder. So it stuns the nation. There was public pressure. They had to arrest this police officer. They did arrest the police officer rather quickly and fired him. He ended up going to trial. The other police officer who was in the other seat was never arrested and was never even involved in any conviction in the crime. The officer who committed the crime was arrested. He ended up having a trial. They argued that the trial, he couldn't get a fair trial in Dallas, so the trial was moved to Austin, Texas, although it was presided over by a Dallas judge. How about that? And so, ironically, two things happened. The officer was convicted of murder. There are two options of murder at that particular time. There was murder with malice, which has a sentence of normally 25 years to life, and then there's also what they call murder without malice, which means that it may have been accidental or whatever, which carries a 5-year sentence. Officer Darrell Kane, the officer who committed this crime, was convicted of murder with malice. However, he was given the sentence of murder without malice. So he was given a 5-year sentence, and he eventually walked in 2.5 years. Okay.
Wow.
Obviously, this set out outrage in Dallas, and again, I don't want to tell the whole film, but within 4 days of Santos's murder, there were riots in the streets of downtown Dallas, and I think the last time there were actually any type of what could be considered race riots in the city of Dallas were right downtown on July the 28th of 1973, because there was the police and some policemen were injured, motorcycles were set on fire. It was a pretty dramatic scene in downtown Dallas. So,
there was a whole bunch of stuff that came out about the Dallas Police Department and how corrupt it was after the JFK assassination, and it didn't get cleaned up at all until well after 1973. So you still have that police department in place.
Well, absolutely. And here's the irony of the whole situation is that, and then kind of going back to that, the JFK story is a completely different one.
Sure.
But there were death threats and a lot of negativity things happening around JFK way before he got here. So anybody who wants to kind of get into this whole idea like, oh, he just magically came to Dallas and it just magically happened in Dallas. Dallas was already a very, very hateful city towards the president.
Well, it was called the city of hate.
Exactly. So that's another story. So if we have this imagination that this just kind of accidentally happened when he came to Dallas, if he was going to come to Dallas, it was going to happen here.
So does your film talk about what happened to that officer after he got out?
So actually, we don't really go into the officer after he got out, but what was the other thing I wanted to kind of share on that? Let me try to think back. So he was convicted of 5 years. We had the race riots in downtown, and you're talking about the police department. At the time of the Santos Rodriguez murder, the Dallas Police Department was 85% white. As a result of the Santos Rodriguez case, within 2 years of Santos's murder, it was probably more like closer to 30%. So they went on a massive hiring of Mexican American and African American police officers immediately after Santos. So Santos was killed in July of 1973, and trust me, they started hiring in August. You know what I'm saying? It was like that.
So by then we had a police chief who was sensitive to this.
Yes, and actually, you have to give Frank Dyson some credit. I think he's taken a hard road for this because he happened to be the victim of circumstance to have to be the chief at this time. He did run a police force that was rough and probably very racist, but that was also part of what the city was at that particular time. So I don't think he expected that type of police action, even though there was a reputation that the police, that their bodies down in the Trinity River, they always used to say. But this being a little boy, I don't think he expected that. Yeah, I think because it was a little boy, I don't think even he expected that. But I think he handled the affair with grace and with skill, and I think he actually did a good job.
So, how long did it take you? I know you were here when this happened, but to learn all of this, and you're just a book of knowledge of the history of Dallas, and in this particular case, how long did it take you to research all this?
Well, first of all, you have to understand I grew up here, so I was here when Santos Rodriguez died. My father was a tremendous civil rights activist. He was actually a college professor and a minister and many things, but he was very an incredibly impactful person in the community of Dallas. Any major cases that happened, whether it was school district related or housing related, they always call my dad. So my dad was Dr. Charles Hunter. I love you. I just got to shout him out since he is looking down on us right now and listening to this interview. But he was an activist. So when Santos got killed, he came to me right away. I was 9 and Santos was 12 and I was his only son. So yeah, he was like, dude, let me tell you what just happened. And yes, there are going to be protests and rallies and I'm going to let that community handle it, but I'll support it the best way I can. But you need to know that this is what's going on in the world. You need to understand because again, remember, we integrated Oak Cliff. At that time, there were not a lot of, it wasn't like I could go outside right now and talk to any of my black friends because I had none in 1973 in Oak Cliff. It was still predominantly white. So, he just wanted to make me aware of that. And so that's really where the research started. So my understanding of Santos goes back all the way to 1973 because I was there that day and I heard it that day.
So were there, who were the leaders in the community in Little Mexico at that time?
Well, you have to understand that all the leaders who are Mexican today, and the names that you hear all the time, they're the vestiges of those people, the Medrano family. I'm not sure how much the Garcias were in there, but Pancho Medrano was the tremendous leader of that community, and his family still carries a tremendous amount of impact and power in the city. At the time, the city councilman was a gentleman by the name of Pedro Aguirre. Pedro was a very talented architect who was having a hard time in Dallas because, unfortunately, due to some of the codes of business, he would actually have to, although he was a very skilled architect, he had to take in other contractors to help him get contracts because he, as a Mexican-American, couldn't go and get a contract. But again, he lived in Little Mexico. The Medranos lived in Little Mexico. That's where Little Mexico, again, becomes that focal point. Anita Martinez, who was our first Mexican-American city councilwoman, comes from Little Mexico. Her father was the founder of El Phoenix Restaurants. So again, Little Mexico was that hub, but all of the leaders that have come to be, and many of them that are here today, are all out of that sync. They're all out of that political area.
You know what I was wondering, as you were talking about it, how was this reported in the Times-Herald and the Morning News? Neither one were known as leaders of anything progressive.
In terms of the murder itself?
Yeah.
Actually, to be quite honest, it was such a tragic event, they couldn't really back out of it. They didn't go into detail. And a lot of it, I talked to people who said that when the news reports came out on on television, except for WFA, and when they listened on the radio, that the news reports didn't even, they didn't even bother to say, that he was killed or that it was a police officer that killed him. It was just like this kid was killed today and yada, yada, yada. And they didn't even report that it was in the backseat of a police car while he was handcuffed at 3 o'clock in the morning on a school night. They left kind of, so again, they had to report the news, but they maybe didn't put details in there kind of thing, but
aren't those kind of important details to leave out? Why would you even be reporting it?
Exactly. But you got to understand that the information that was forced to come out of the city of Dallas was done under the pressure of the rest of the nation. Mm-hmm. You got to understand, they were getting telegraphs, the mayor was getting telegraphs from mayors in other cities like, dude, fix this before our community thinks it's going to happen here. Mm-hmm. So you got to understand, the whole community was shocked. The United States was shocked because it was like, dude, hey, if it happened, sorry for you guys in Dallas, but man, we would not want that to happen in Seattle or LA or Chicago because we'd have riots here. So
how long did the protests last?
The protests lasted for weeks because, again, they started as marches and physical protests, but then it became to people being at the city council meetings and meeting with the mayor and meeting with the police chief for months trying to do it. And that's where all the police policies changed. You have to understand that search and seizure, parental permissions, what time you can go pick up children, handcuffing them, interrogation tactics, everything that was part of the Dallas Police Department, they had to change it after Santos. They had to rewrite all the books. The chief left. He didn't even make it through 73. July, Santos died. Riots happened. He was blamed for the riots. Mm-hmm. He resigned, I think, in August or September, and he was walking. January 1st, he was out. But what he did manage to do was hire a bunch of blacks and Latinos before he left. And I guess that's part of his legacy.
And that's probably part of why the city didn't like him. Because the city was white run then.
Absolutely, but
almost
again,
entirely.
and I'm going to share this kind of privately, as much as privately as you can say on the radio.
Whisper it.
Okay, I'll
Just
whisper it. I'll whisper it. I was talking to another gentleman yesterday who was a tremendous civil rights leader, and he was there at the time of the Santos murder, and was a very active member of the community. And he actually went to Police Chief Dyson, and I don't know, I can't say this is true or false, but he actually went to the Police Chief, Frank Dyson, and he said, look, guys, you got to get this guy arrested. You got to get, whatever. And according to his words, Frank Dyson said, dude, the police union will not let me fire a white police officer for killing somebody who is not white. And whether that's true or not, I don't know. Whether that's going to get me in trouble tomorrow. Again, I'm just quoting somebody else, okay? But again, you tend to believe those types of things. So how powerful was the Dallas Police Officers Union if 85% of the police force was at that time? Do you think they wanted it to be 50% at that time? Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah, I'm guessing not.
Guessing not.
Just a guess.
Yeah.
So, how did? We're up against the break.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. How long did the Morning News and Times Herald even continue reporting on this?
I can't say how long the papers did, but I can tell you WFAA and KERA were on this thing from start to finish. One of the blessings of this, and I'll put in a real quick plug before we get off here for commercial, is that the Dallas, the SMU William G. Jones Film Library was very instrumental in us making this film because they own all of the news archives of all of the WFAA, KERA, and KRLD. KRLD was Channel 4, I believe. They own all of the news archives. So I could actually literally go to them and say 1973, and they tell me what day, and they could tell me the news. So this was, just to finish this up, I can tell you this. In the last 60 years, the 3 most reported news stories in the history of Dallas in the last 60 years are the JFK assassination, desegregation and the entire busing issue when they started busing in the schools, and Santos Rodriguez.
That's interesting.
Wow.
Isn't it interesting that if you didn't live here at the time, or if you were very young, like Lerone, who was
1.
Yeah, so you don't remember it.
Well, not only I remember, I wasn't here. I was down in Houston.
It's just not a story that we even remember right now. We need to take a break. You're listening to Lambda Weekly on 89.3 Knon FM. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with Lerone Landis and the late Patti Fink. Let me read this first. It's the 9th annual Knon Harmonica Blowout. Paul Osher will be starring harmonica player. He's a harmonica player with Muddy Waters and many more, and he'll be here in a rare Dallas appearance. Don't miss out on a legend. Also appearing is the Harrington Clark Project and the Super Kings with Stompin' Bill Johnson and the Dallas Blues All-Stars with Hash Brown and Mike Morgan. That's Sunday, July 29th, next Sunday. Early show doors at 4 p.m. Free barbecue from Dickey's Barbecue. Poor David's Pub is where it's being held. That's down in the Cedars. And tickets and more info at knon.org.
This is Rollins Gilliland, and I'm listening to Lambda Weekly on 89.3. And darn glad to be doing it.
And you're listening to Lambda Weekly, and our opinions are not the opinions of the station because I guess we don't condemn Trump enough. I'm just guessing.
Just guessing.
Our guest today is filmmaker Byron Hunter. His new film, Santos Vive, when is that coming out?
That will be screening tomorrow at the Angelica Theater at 7:30. That's going to be a private screening, so I should actually be saying this on the radio either, but it's too late, okay? Here you guys show up, hey, I didn't really say this.
But there's a second screening.
But there will be a public screening on Tuesday.
The second one is at the...
Tuesday, July the 24th. At the Texas Theater at 7:30 p.m. The admission for that is a donation of $5, which is actually going to go towards helping the family out, which is another story all of its own.
Awesome.
It'll be Tuesday, July the 24th at the Texas Theater on Jefferson and Oak Cliff. And for me to let you know the significance of that, if you listened to me earlier in this broadcast, I told you that Santos Rodriguez was murdered on the morning of July the 24th, 1973.
And you're saying we'll help the family.
Yes.
This is a while already.
Yeah, this is
45 years.
Let's get into that whole aspect of it. Although Daryl Kane was convicted of actual murder with malice, which is about the worst that you could have been convicted for at that time, the city of Dallas, the police department in the city of Dallas failed to ever issue an apology to the family for this action. They also never compensated the family for this action.
You know, one thing I just realized, you're saying murder with malice, which is a 30-year sentence, was the harshest.
No, 25 years to
25
life.
To life.
Okay.
Yeah.
We didn't have the death penalty at that time.
It
wasn't Texas, but there was a stay from the Supreme Court.
Exactly.
So that would have been, that's why he wouldn't have been even considered for that.
Right.
So he wouldn't get considered, but he was definitely considered for 25 years to life. So how he got 5, the world is still trying to figure out that math. Okay.
Who at the time gave the sentence? Was it a jury award of the sentence, or was it the judge?
I believe it was a jury situation. Yes, it was a jury. And the jury was an all-white jury, actually. So an all-white jury actually convicted a white police officer for that action. So if you think about it, it's interesting because they felt that the publicity of the case would hurt it to move it to Austin, but maybe they should have kept it in Dallas.
You know, what's interesting about the Santos story is it's very analogous to Emmett Till's story, and that, you know, pulled out in the middle of the night out of bed, killed. But fortunately for Santos, his, the culprit was brought to justice. The same thing didn't happen to.
You know why that was done? So that people of color wouldn't even feel safe in their own homes.
Of course,
you know,
there was a couple of a decade and a half before, so I know that made a difference also. But then when it did go to trial, it was an all-white jury, and they let them go. And
they just reopened that case.
The Department of Justice just reopened it. Yeah.
And if I may add to that whole situation regarding the Santos case, and this may have been one of the overlying factors of why maybe they actually got a guilty verdict, is that it was revealed during the trial. Daryl Kane, he was 30 years old at the time when he was arrested. He had been a police officer in Dallas for 5 years. It was reported that in April, if I'm wrong, don't sue me, in April of 1970, now remember, he was 5 years on the force in 73, so that means he started in 68, I would surmise. In April of 1973, he escaped indictment for the murder of a young man in Dallas who was African American named Michael Moorhead. Michael Moorhead and his brother had actually they had robbed a food store because they were poor people, and they actually didn't even take money out of the register. They broke into a store and were taking groceries out, like meat and bread and cheese. Okay? As they were leaving, they tripped a silent alarm that they were not aware of. So as they came out, they were accosted by a group of police officers. They saw all these cars pulling up. So obviously they made a run for it. While they made a run for it, Officer Daryl Kane and his partner, whose name was J.O. Kirksey, they went out chasing Michael. There were two of them. I guess some of them chased the one brother, and I guess they chased the other brother. When Michael was found, he was lying face down on the ground with 13 bullets in him.
Oh, my God.
Wow.
This went to police review, it went to whatever, and there was not even an indictment on it. So he had that murder already over him, that he had managed to escape any justice or any discipline at all. It was later that he had actually shot another gentleman who he said had disrespected he and his wife and had almost killed him, but I don't think he died. So he didn't have that murder, but that was an African-American gentleman as well.
Imagine how emboldened he must have felt.
Absolutely. So at the time that Santos was killed, yes, there was shock in the community. I don't know whether there was shock in the police force, though, because this guy had already had a track record of doing this. So
the shock was that he was indicted.
Absolutely. So I think part of the fact that he was actually indicted, which was also the first time, and I hope I'm not going to say, but it's one of the first times that a police officer had ever been indicted for anything regarding a Mexican American, even for assault or for anything else, anything. Like, So
Well, Dallas up until the 60s really was a small city.
absolutely, absolutely.
So I doubt there were indictments against police officers for anything before
Absolutely,
that.
again, and you're absolutely correct on that. So, so that's kind of,
So this film delves into more than just about the murder of Santos. Talk a little bit about the significance of Little Mexico. First of all, for those who don't know, where is Little Mexico in the city of Dallas?
Okay, cool. A new history lesson here. First of all, I got to ask you all a question because this will bring out everybody who knows it. Anybody familiar with the Katy Trail? Sure. Everybody knows what the Katy Trail is.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Then I'm going to start by referencing that so you all can understand how this whole thing works. When the railroads were approved in the United States, each state had a contract, so they would actually do contracts with different people. The people who won the contract to build the rail lines here was called the MKT, which was later shortened or nicknamed the Katy. So the Katy actually comes from the name the Missouri, Kansas, Texas line. Oklahoma was not a state, and although the tracks went through Oklahoma, Oklahoma's not technically a state yet, so that's why it's not called the MOKT, or then we'd have something different.
It's a state now.
It might be. Sometimes I wonder.
You have to wonder.
But here's the deal: is that the Katy came from Mexico and then went through Texas and into the heartland of America. That was kind of how they made it. So obviously, the first workers that they hired were in Mexico to start the tracks in Mexico, etc. And these people worked their way up. So when they got up to Dallas, there's the Katy train line. Right around downtown Dallas, a lot of the Mexican workers decided that they were going to camp shack and do their thing right there instead of trying to whatever. They liked the city, they liked whatever, and they decided they were going to live there. So basically, the first campsite for Mexicans came along the Katy Trail lines. That line is right near downtown, and I'll give you a real good description in a second, but let me just kind of get through the story. It's like, so they started that community. That community eventually became Little Mexico. Mm-hmm. So just from those guys working on the Katy rail line, so one thing to know is that they built the Katy rail line. So when you're walking the Katy Trail or riding the Katy Trail and saying, wow, what a beautiful trail, keep in mind Mexicans built that for you, okay? Mexicans built that because if you go to the Katy Trail today and you read the historical plaques on it, they only talk about how they chased the Indians away and made this a white settlement, and nobody failed to mention that, oh yes, Mexicans came through and they actually built our Katy Trail.
I think Mexicans only started coming into this country after Trump was elected.
So that being said, if you can follow the Katy Trail, the Katy Trail runs along where the American Airlines Center is, that Pike Park area, then it comes all the way into downtown near Ross, down what they call the West End. The West End, the Woodall Rogers, El Phoenix Restaurant, which has actually literally been sitting there since 1918. So that sign that says there since 1918 is real, believe it or not. So that'll tell you there were Mexicans there then, okay? Going back to Victory Park, the American Airlines Arena, and Pike Park. Harry Hines,
it's
make
kind
that
of a
circle.
U. It's kind of a U north of
Absolutely.
downtown.
Make that all the way. Now, Maple and then maybe Oaklawn kind of are the end lines. But if you come all the way inside Oaklawn, all the way back to Dallas through Victory Park,
The only part of Little Mexico that's left is Maple to Harry Hines, from about a little bit above Wycliffe and the tollway down to Oaklawn.
I'll take that, but I didn't even know there was still an existence of Little Mexico. So you're telling me something new.
Yeah,
but again,
and it's like 3 blocks by maybe 6.
And so again, if you look at that area, that was Little Mexico. And as I had mentioned prior, the gas station where Santos Rodriguez was killed in Little Mexico is now a Compass Bank on Cedar Springs, which if you look out of the Compass Bank, you're looking directly at the Hotel Crescent Court. To your right is the Ritz-Carlton. All of that was Little Mexico. So you're living in good places now. You people living in Victory Park and all these areas, you got some prime real estate, but I'm just letting you know that was Little Mexico, okay? So love it or leave it. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and part of that was State Thomas.
Yes, and then thank you. what wrapped around downtown. So as you come up Woodall Rogers, we're going to make an imaginary line. We're not going to go. We're not going to go up towards the area going towards Victory Park or American Airlines Arena, which is also Little Mexico, American Airlines Arena. We're going to go towards Woodall Rogers. So let's say going to draw an imaginary thing up Woodall Rogers. So you're going up Woodall Rogers towards 75. When you get to where that Arts Magnet, Booker T. Washington is, and then you see the Arts District and One Arts Plaza and all of the Symphony Hall and all of that, that was an area called Stake Thomas. That was the black part of town, okay? Booker T. Washington is not there by coincidence. That's where black people live. That's why Booker T. Washington is there. Now they call it Arts Magnet, but that's why black people are there. That area went all the way out to Oak Lawn, which is where the Target is on, and the Walmart and all this stuff, to where, I don't know, that First Street, Haskell. That was all the black town.
Yeah, and I think Haskell, or not Peak, I guess it was Haskell, was the northern border of State Thomas.
Absolutely.
And it was only about 3 blocks wide because it was from McKinney to Central Expressway at that area.
Absolutely. And so you got to realize that everything that is uptown, so when you exit off of Central and you turn on Haskell and you walk, and as soon as you see the uptown sign, that was State Thomas. And then when you drive on around and you get up on McKinney and you drive back around, you're still in the black part of town until you get down to where the Hotel Crescent Court is. Now you're driving through what was the Mexican part of town, all the way till you go through American Airlines Arena, all the way through Victory Park. You're driving through what was the minority part of town.
Okay, so the one other part of this that we were talking about before the show is when they started marketing Uptown in the 90s. Uptown was from the Katy Trail to Central Expressway. Well, on the City Plat, down to Woodall Rogers, is Oak Lawn on the City Plat. And when I moved here, that was Oak Lawn. In fact, the biggest gay restaurant was right on McKinney in what is now Uptown. When real estate developers started developing it, well, we can't sell Oak Lawn because that's where the you-know-who's live. And so they changed the name to Uptown, and all of a sudden it's Uptown, and as soon as they came up with that name, prices went through the roof.
Exactly, and we had that same conversation about Cedar Springs. Cedar Springs is one of the longest streets you can ever drive on, but that 1 or 6 block area back in the 60s and 70s where the gay community was there, did their business, built restaurants, built stores, and did their thing. You know, it's a 6 block area at that time. It was a very small area. And it's like, but the whole street was labeled because of that. You know what I mean? It's just
Do you know, in the 90s, I was trying to open a store downtown in the West End, and when I told them my previous retail experience was on Cedar Springs, they would not even talk to me.
Absolutely.
So when the West End Marketplace was going out of business, I walked into their office and I told them how happy I was that they were going under.
Of course you did.
Well, you know that I would do that.
I know you would.
Okay,
Absolutely. I'm surprised you didn't do it sooner.
Well, no, when it gave me more pleasure that these people were losing their jobs for being homophobic. So let's get back to the film.
So I also wanted to know, tell us a little bit about what drew you to even want to make this documentary. Or did somebody bring the idea to you?
4 minutes.
I know I go along with it here. I'm going to tell you a story, and it's really kind of deep. It's kind of deep and a little bit spiritual. As I told you, my father was involved, and actually one of the impacts of the Santos Rodriguez murder was that it forced Dallas to create what was called a Police Civilian Review Board. Prior to that, the Internal Affairs of the Police Department, they assessed every case. So like in the previous case where Officer Kane and his partner had put 13 bullets in Michael Moorhead, it was determined by Internal Affairs that it wasn't worthy or whatever. So by what Officer Kane did was he changed the whole aspect of it, because now all of a sudden, now you have to create an independent board of people to determine whether cases are going to trial or they should be indictments, etc. My father was probably the first chairman of that group, or maybe one of the first two. So,
you know, if you go back to the Kennedy assassination, the feds had to physically pull the president's body out of the hands of Dallas police who weren't going to release it.
Yes.
Dallas was treating it like, oh, this is just a local case.
Exactly.
So, I mean, that was the attitude in Dallas.
So on that note, keep in mind now my dad's status in this whole thing. So he actually had to make rulings on the Santos Rodriguez case, even after telling me when I was a little boy and helping them with the protests, okay? I was at the Jones Film Library. We were talking there with some of the guys, Scott Martin and Jeremy Sprack, and I got to shout them out. We were talking, and we were looking at footage of basketball from 1973, and so I told them about the Santos Rodriguez case. A week later, they sent me a letter or an email with their chairman, Jolene DeVerges, saying, hey, we got all this footage of Santos' case, and we didn't even know it existed, or we knew nothing about Santos. So we think a documentary should be made, and we're willing to help you with this footage, all of it. Wow. You know, WFAA, all of it, KERA, all of it, just to make a documentary. So I said, let me think about it. I'm in the middle of another project. I like Santos and yada yada. Next day, I got an email from Rick Halperin, who is the chairman of the SMU Human Rights Program. He said, I need to have a meeting with you, Byron. We went and sat down with a gentleman named Hadi Jawad, who is an activist, works with the Dallas Peace and Justice Center. Okay?
You know Hadi.
Yep, Hadi.
Great guy.
So I sit down with Hadi and Rick. And Rick and Hadi, remember, one day after this email, 1 week after I just coincidentally mentioned Santos Rodriguez to these people, okay, they, Hadi and them say, well, look, we need your help because it's the 45th anniversary of Santos Rodriguez, and we'd like to know if you could do a documentary. And I was like, damn, I just got an email yesterday and I got all the footage from the SMU Jones Film Library, and now today.
Yeah, they were working behind your back, conspiring.
Yeah, but check this out. So then I started talking with Hadi Jawad, and I introduced myself, and I said my name was Dr. Charles Hunter. My name is Byron Hunter. My dad was Dr. Charles Hunter. The man starts tearing up. And I was like, why is he tearing up with this kind of interesting smile? And he says, your father was my mentor. Wow. Now you understand why the film is done. Then I met Bessie Rodriguez and had a chance to sit down with her. She's 75 years old, still alive, and has been grieving her son for 45 years, and the city has done nothing about it other than make an apology 5 years ago. Mike Rawlings did.
Wow.
Okay.
So the city did make an apology.
They did make an apology 5 years ago, and that was really, I can't say what it was about, but there were a series of news articles that came out at the 40th anniversary, and shortly thereafter, Mayor Rawlings apologized. They gave them no award or no damages or anything. I think I was told at some point they actually paid $2,000 to the family to cover the funeral burial or something, maybe then or maybe before another time. But yeah, that's kind of how that whole thing came together.
So there's going to be a screening of the film at the Texas Theater on Tuesday at what time?
At 7:30.
7:30. Will the filmmaker be present?
I will be present.
So if you have other questions, you can ask him then. You're listening to Lambda Weekly on 89.3 Knon FM. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with Lerone Landis and the late Patti Fink. Our guest is filmmaker Byron Hunter. More with Byron in just a minute.
Hi, this is Valletta Lil, and I listen to Lambda Weekly. I hope that you will too.
And this is Lambda Weekly. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with Lerone and Patti, and our guest is filmmaker Byron Hunter, who just told us off air a really gruesome story about what happened after the murder of Santos Rodriguez. Is that in the film?
It's talked about in the film.
Talks about in the film.
That
okay.
They're going to have to come. They got to pay admission of that one.
Yeah, I don't want that part on the air.
That's admission for that one, okay?
Yeah, because the station has to disclaim us because.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
well, can we talk a little bit about Santos's brother is still with us, and his mother is still with us. Yeah. How have they been doing all these years?
David, and I hope David hears this because we really wanted him to be involved in the film, and he really did not want to, and I obviously understand. Obviously, he is traumatized by that incident.
Of course.
And I think you have to think about it in many different levels because, yes, A, it was a bad incident for anybody to see anybody get killed. Mm-hmm. B, it was a bad incident to see one of your family members get killed. But then C, what you have to keep in mind is that, if you have ever had brothers or sisters and you're the older, then you feel that responsibility for taking care of your little one. Mm-hmm. So the brother that he was the only brother I believe he had at the time. Actually, there might have been one other brother, but David was the oldest. So he was responsible for all the kids. But then here's the next youngest, and you see him go. So I couldn't imagine the horror of that.
And D, they were children.
And exactly. And he was 13 years old, exactly. And he's looking at his 12-year-old brother. Yeah. So what would his opinion be of the police? Well, I have absolutely no idea. What is he feeling? I have no idea. But I know that he is alive, and he is 58 years old today. And we send him love and support. And, I just know he's living a very quiet life and just kind of staying out of the melee of life. But again, my sadness for him is that he was never even offered any type of mental health care, no counseling, nothing after the murder. Again, like I told you, after this happened, after the newspaper stopped reporting, everybody just went away. So nobody said, maybe we should apologize to the family, or maybe we should go offer some type of services to help the little boy, and maybe we should do whatever. The community just turned back and went back to what life was,
The trauma he must have experienced and deeply scarred by it. I mean, you're made helpless by being cuffed behind your back, and his brother's being murdered in front of him, literally. And who's to say he's not next?
Right.
You know, I mean, he could put another bullet in.
Right.
Yeah, put another bullet in. Let's do you too. You know, if a
He's
police
witness.
officer,
He's a witness.
sure,
if nothing else.
you know, I mean that just, it's heartbreaking to think that he's lived his entire life with this scar and this trauma, and our community did nothing.
And that goes back to the idea of wanting, when we talk about the donations, we want to help the family. Going back to what you had mentioned about Bessie, is that Bessie grew up in a hard situation. You know, she was a victim of child custody because her parents were alcoholics, so they lost all the kids, so she ended up being adopted. You know, she got married at 14 or 15, which is what most Mexicans did at that time, but was married and had David and Santos, then her husband left. You know, she was a victim of domestic abuse. She ended up being arrested because someone who had been abusing her, they got into a tussle over the gun, and she ended up going to jail. So she was literally in jail when Santos got out. Then while she was in jail, Santos gets murdered. You know, and then she gets out of jail and faces so much.
Who was taking care of Santos?
Still the grandfather.
grandparents.
That's right, the other grandparents.
So,
how long did it take you to put this film together? I know there was a lot of stock footage already, or news
it's
articles.
still really not together. It is what we're going to do is we're going to show people what we have. It is a complete story, but it's not going to be the most cosmetically perfect thing, only because you can't do that in 90 days. It's impossible, especially when you have a life and you're working on other things. But I wanted to do it because of the timing of the situation. The 24th is the anniversary of Santos's death, and whether it was 5 minutes long or 18 minutes long, I wanted to be able to have at least a complete story for people to actually come and look at and go, wow, that's Dallas, and that's what's happened in the last 100 years, and this is why the Santos case is so significant. That's what I wanted to do. So that we have managed to do, and it's about a 80-minute film right now. But again, I do want to make it better, and I plan to actually, when I do release it, I'll actually add some things and polish it up and make it a perfect kind of thing.
Now, will his family be at the showing?
The family is going to be at the private screening on the 23rd, and we are hopeful that they will be at the showing. David, I'm not sure he'll be at anything, but Bessie, I will be there on the 23rd, and yes, we're going to try to get her there for the 24th. We think it would be great for the community. My biggest concern for her was like, you know, do I want to ask this woman to come to a premiere on the anniversary day that her son got murdered? You know what I'm saying? But Bessie's an incredibly strong person, and she's like, I'm down.
It depends on how she's looking at it. This is a way to commemorate his life.
Absolutely. And so, to say, wow, we won't want to make a full commitment, she's down. She's down, and I'm sure she will be there Tuesday. So if you come out, there's a very, very high likely chance you will see Bessie there, and that would be good because she needs all of our love. So again, she's just to finish up on her, she's living in poverty. She always has lived in poverty. She's living in the projects in West Dallas. She has gotten any kind of financial, any type of residential benefit for what happened to her and her son. She's been grieving this for 45 years and can't even say she has the dignity of saying, wow, there's a mural painted for him somewhere in Dallas, or there's a plaque, or there's something. She doesn't even have the dignity of even saying he existed in a city that she grew up in and that he grew up in. And I think that hurts her very deeply.
Do you know why a civil suit was never filed?
Well, actually, what happened was after Darrell Kane exhausted all of his pleas, because, he appealed all the way to the Supreme Court and lost. So by that time, the Justice Department of the United States had the opportunity to review the case. So apparently, and again, I did a lot of research, but I can't tell you all these in specifics, but apparently word of the Santos case got to President Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter came to Dallas, or was in San Antonio, and it was brought up to him by a lot of the Mexican leaders and government people about what is this Santos case, because at that time the statute of limitations was 5 years. So he got killed in July of
on murder.
Yes.
Oh my God.
No, this was to review for civil rights.
I see. Okay.
So to review anything for the Justice Department, they can't do murder. They can only do civil rights violations. So he was killed in 73 of July. So by July of 78, if nothing was done, then the case was gone. There was no way you could prosecute after that. So basically, Jimmy Carter was in Texas. He's gone from around, and he stands up and gives a speech and says, "I will not let this happen. Santos Rodriguez, there will be justice for this little boy. We're going to make sure that Daryl Kane faces abuse charges, whatever, and that my Justice Department is going to take care of this." Griffin Bell was the head of the Justice Department at the time, looked at the case and decided against it. He decided not to review the case. So in June of 1978, he put out a memo saying the United States Justice Department has looked at this and we do not see a need to review the case. And then the statute of limitations ran out 1 month later. So any kind of justice that had ever have been done for Santos ended in 1978.
Yeah, the other thing, Lerone, is municipal governments have an awful lot of immunity over a number of things. As we learned in a case that I was involved in. Like with the police, if you're shot by the police and they're pursuing a criminal, which in this case that's what they would argue, whether or not this is the person who did it, they're immune from prosecution. Now, if a police car hits yours, you have general expectation that you're not going to get hit by another driver. They would have responsibility for that. And that's exactly how it was explained to me. So, I don't know how much they could have done. I don't know whether they could have sued in this case or not. But it would have been difficult no matter what, even if they could. How did... okay, the case kind of died. Was it still being covered 5 years later? When Griffin Bell dropped
Actually, it had stopped being covered, but it started being covered again after the Jimmy Carter speech. And that's kind of what really triggered it, because everybody kind of, and again, as you know, for President Carter to have addressed it in a speech in San Antonio, that means that somebody told him when he got down there. So apparently it was still alive, maybe amongst politicians or other Spanish, Mexican-American community leaders. They hadn't let it die because they brought it up to him. And Bessie had also written a letter, and I think that's why I think that's how he first got wind of it, is that she asked that he consider reviewing the case. And then I think that's when he came down and commented on it,
Have you had any coverage about the film? With the local media?
Yes.
That's awesome to hear.
And I cannot be very honest in my things, and you can go ahead. You want to put the disclaimer on this again, my friend?
Oh yeah, we're too conservative for this station.
To give everyone credit, I have been asked to do media with all of them. Should I name them or just say I've been able to do?
Just like local,
WFAA, KERA, Dallas Observer,
KNON,
KNON, Dallas Morning News did something, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, there has been some great support. But here's the point I wanted to make. I wanted a disclaimer on. It's like, I've been living in New York most of my adult life, and although I'm from Dallas, I'm a New Yorker, pretty much. So my attitude tends to be very New Yorkish. So when people got wind of the fact that we were doing this film, everybody was like, "Oh my God, somebody's going to actually bring up Santos Rodriguez? Oh my God, who is this idiot here? What is wrong with these people? Don't they know that that's not to be talked about in the city of Dallas, like, ever?" So I come in as like this completely naive individual, like, what's the big thing? So, I was here when Santos died, but I haven't been here for the last 30 years, so I don't know politics or who's what or what's supposed to be hush-hush in Dallas or anything. So everybody's like, so my irony and what makes me laugh is that as I do these interviews with all these news media, it's like their first response is almost like, "Who are you and who gave you the cojones in order to actually come back here and bring up the Santos Rodriguez case? Like, did they not tell you? Did you not get that knock on the door last night? Like, why are you doing this?" So it's not, they didn't say it that way, and nobody's made it be that way, but it feels that way.
And that's interesting, because it is 45 years later, and I'm not saying so his mother should have gotten over it. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying in 45 years, we have a completely different city. And, I mean, it took 50 years, but we're facing the Kennedy assassination, and it's not like, well, we killed him. It happened here, and people who did it were from here, but, I think that's odd that people would say...
Can I say... I think what I'm getting from other people, because again, this is not my own opinion, so this is even a worse thing to clarify. But the things that I'm getting from people who actually lived here is that although there have been changes in the police department, although we are now in a progressive, more supposedly progressive police department with an African-American leader, et cetera, they still don't want this case to be brought up. Although they've acknowledged it, and there are some wonderful people on the Dallas Police Department, don't get me wrong. Major Williams, who was with us yesterday, there are some great people. But the police department as a whole does not want to have to deal with this case anymore. They wanted to go away and be done with. And if there's a monument for this kid somewhere, then they got to start protecting it. Then I don't think they're going to want to go and guard a statue of Santos Rodriguez, okay?
It seems like it's real easy what the police department statement should be. This shouldn't have happened.
Well, and again, I was at an event yesterday, and one of Major Williams who's there apologized. So I got no ill will towards that, but that was another time past. But the other thing that I feel like you kind of ought to understand is that, as we had mentioned, over the last 40 years, a lot of people have made a lot of promises to Bessie Rodriguez for parks, for schools, for street name changes, etc. They mostly use it as a political situation, because if you attach yourself to the most vulnerable human being in Dallas whose son got murdered, and you say, hey, Bessie's my friend and I'm going to get justice for Santos, elect me. And I'm not saying that happened, you know what I'm saying? But, a lot of people have promised a lot of things to her. And part of the intrigue of this particular story is that Bessie, I love her to death, and one of the great things about her is she's a record keeper. So when we did this documentary, she's like, here's every letter I got from every politician promising me every single thing that was ever promised to me in the last 35 years, Byron.
Wow.
So you'll see a little bit of that when you come to the film as well. And I don't think the people who wrote those letters necessarily want them to be out. But we don't name names. But I think it's important for people to not think that her desire to have a memorial for her son is some aberration, that she's daydreaming and has had some thoughts that her ego is whatever. No, it started because they started writing letters to her saying, hey, we want to memorialize your son and we want to get So-So Street renamed. Is that okay with you? And I guess after the 12th letter over 30 years, she kind of figured out maybe this is not going to really happen.
Wow.
We're coming up to the end of the show, but I want to end with, what do you hope that people get out of this film?
I hope that people become educated on the history of Dallas. I hope people we have millions of people in Dallas that were not here in 1970, 1973, 1975. It is cool to be able to be here living in Dallas, say, wow, Dallas is cool and fun and neat, and I got a nice location, I got a nice house, I got a great job, I got this and that and this and that and this and that. My life is safe and everything is protected. Your life is not safe and protected, because you have to understand the history of what this town is. And whether it's your race, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, whatever, this is still a very conservative city, and if your goals or ideals or how you choose to live life are not along the lines of what they view this Southern Christian 1950 white settlement to be, then you're going to have an issue some point in time. It's just going to happen. But I'm just hoping that people will want to look at the film and be educated by it, and not just come to want to hear about Santos, but want to come to hear about all the other things, the gentrification of Little Mexico, how Uptown was created, how the city shifted the city in order to do things, how the highway system destroyed communities. It's much deeper than, this little boy got killed, even though that is a centrifuge for the story.
Okay, and this film's going to be shown at the Texas Theater Tuesday, 7:30 p.m. A $5 donation is asked for. You can make bigger donations, and the money is going to Santos' mother.
Absolutely, to the family and to working towards memorial.
And Byron, I want to thank you for being here. It was
so much.
Real quick hour. We'll be back next week. Jennifer is our guest, and
can I do just one? Can I also shout out my friend Herbert Wright? He's an incredibly talented global abstract artist. My best friend. He's been here, and he's in here in Dallas, and he's here to support me today. So thank you, Herbert, for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll be back next week. Have a good week, and don't melt.